On the evening of October 30th, according to Reason, police in Fannin County arrested a mother named Brittany Patterson, in front of her 4 children. And they fingerprinted her and put her in an orange jumpsuit and sent her off to jail. She's now facing up to a year in prison and a fine of $1,000. So what was Brittany Patterson's crime exactly? Did she rob a convenience store while high on meth and fentanyl? Did she torch a federal courthouse and assault the guards? Did she follow a random guy around at night and then pound his head into the pavement? Well, you know Brittany Patterson didn't do any of those things, because if she had, the left would be defending her right now. Kamala Harris would probably be raising money to bail her out. What Brittany actually did, and this isn't an exaggeration, is allow her 11-year-old son to go for a walk. That's it. Specifically, he walked to a small town that's less than a mile away from their home. And to give some context here, Brittany lives on a 16-acre property with her children and their father, who works in another state. They have family all around the area, including her sisters and mother, who live just 2 minutes away. So this is not a situation where they're living in, say, the south side of Chicago, where they don't know anybody and people get shot every day and it's very dangerous. This is very much a familiar environment, a safe environment that we're talking about. And here's what happened. Quote, Patterson had driven her eldest son to a medical appointment. Her youngest son, 11-year-old Soren, intended to come along, but wasn't around when it was time to leave. I figured he was in the woods or at Grandma's house, says Patterson. Soren, however, was not playing in the woods. He decided to walk to downtown Mineral Bluff, a town of just 370 people. It's not quite a mile from his house. A woman who saw him walking alongside the road, speed limit 25 in some places, 35 in others, asked him if he was okay. He said yes. Nevertheless, she called the police. Now, eventually, a female sheriff showed up, picked up Soren, and dropped him off with his grandmother. She also lectured the mother about how her son could have been kidnapped or been hit by a car. Then the mother scolded her child for leaving home without telling anyone, and then the female sheriff left. Now, already this is a situation that's escalated well out of proportion. There's nothing, out of the ordinary about an 11-year-old going for an unsupervised walk in an area that's familiar and safe. We're talking about a county where the crime rate is well below the national average. So in this scenario, maybe you can understand why a well-meaning bystander would see an unaccompanied child and ask if everything's all right. I mean, even that seems a little overboard. I don't know why. Just because you see an 11-year-old walking, I don't know why you would even think to ask if they're all right. There's no reason why they wouldn't be. Unless they look distressed for some reason. But regardless, in no universe does it make sense for that bystander, having heard that everything is fine, to then immediately call the police. I mean, this is a psychotic level of meddling. Also, by the way, the sheriff brought up the child could have been kidnapped. The chances that an 11-year-old gets kidnapped by a stranger in broad daylight is significantly less than 1,000,000 to 1. It's the kind of thing that almost never happens. There are thousands of other horrible things more likely to happen to your child than that. Statistically, kidnappings are almost always related to family disputes. They're almost always carried out by family members. They're almost never just random kid being taken off the street. It does happen very rarely, but it almost never happens. That's just a fact. That's the statistical reality. So a fear of kidnapping should not prevent an 11-year-old from taking a walk in a safe neighborhood. What should prevent him then? Well, what is there to be seriously worried about? Now, this is normally the point where I'd talk about how the fake experts are wildly out of touch on this issue. But in this case, even the fake experts agree with me on this. You can go to the American Academy of Pediatrics and they'll tell you that, in their esteemed opinion, a child older than 10 years old can indeed go outside from location to location and walk around without an adult monitoring their every movement. So in case you were wondering, in case you needed their blessing, you have it. It's not remotely a controversial point. Anyone who has children, who has ever been around children, can probably tell you this. But in this case, the story didn't end there. Quoting again from Reason magazine, at 6:30 p.m. that night, the sheriff returned with another officer. They told Patterson to turn around and put her hands behind her back. As 3 of her kids watched, Patterson was handcuffed. The sheriff took her purse and phone, put her in the cruiser, and hauled her off to jail. To Patterson, none of this made sense. She had grown up in the area with plenty of unsupervised time to wander and play and was raising her kids that way too. Patterson was soon released on a $500 bail. The next day, a case manager from the Division of Family and Children Services came out for a home visit and even went to interview Patterson's oldest son at his school. So now we're at the point where the local government is criminalizing parenting practices that were standard for every generation of Americans up until like 5 seconds ago. In an attempt to supposedly look after the interests of a child, they've decided to arrest that child's mother in front of him. I mean, that couldn't possibly cause any issues with the child's mental state or his ability to get to school and live his life. Now, sure, his father works out of state, but who cares? Just throw the mother in prison. You ever feel like you're being watched on the internet? Unfortunately, you're not just being paranoid. You are indeed being monitored every single time you go online. Internet service providers can see every single website you visit. In the US, they're even allowed to sell your browsing history. And yes, that includes everything you do inside a so-called incognito tab. If you think that should be illegal, I agree with you. But until the law can be changed, you need to protect yourself. And the way I do it is with ExpressVPN, an easy-to-use app that encrypts and reroutes all my internet traffic through secure servers. Because I use ExpressVPN, my internet service provider can't see my browsing history. They've got nothing to sell because they've got nothing on me. ExpressVPN also hides my IP address, which is the number that identifies you on the internet. Because I hide my IP address with ExpressVPN, greedy data brokers can't use it to build a profile of me to sell off to marketers. My data is mine and mine alone. I wouldn't call myself a tech expert, but I find ExpressVPN incredibly easy to use. I just tap one button to get connected, and they have apps for every device, phone, laptop, desktop, tablets, you name it. Not to mention, it's the #1 rated VPN by CNET, The Verge, and tons of other tech reviewers as well. So if you want to start taking your online privacy seriously, don't wait. Use my special link to get 3 extra months of ExpressVPN for free at expressvpn.com/election. That's expressvpn.com/election. The state has determined that it's in the best interest of this 11-year-old for his mother to be incarcerated for up to a year. But the story still doesn't end there. Local officials in this tiny county in Georgia kept on going. In Georgia, officials decided that it wasn't enough to arrest this mother and drag her away from her children. They had to go further. This is from Reason Magazine once again, quote, "A few days later, the Division of Family and Children's Services presented Patterson with a safety plan for her to sign. It would require her to delegate a safety person to be a knowing participant and guardian and watch over the children whenever she leaves home. The plan would also require Patterson to download an app on her son's phone, allowing for his location to be monitored." So the government is demanding that this woman agree to conditions that are clearly unconstitutional, not to mention completely unreasonable, not to mention she's being essentially punished without being convicted of any crime, which is how it can often happen, when you've got these sorts of issues. And they think that if they threaten her with jail time, she'll agree to them. But to her credit, she's not doing that. She's telling the government that this is obscene, and she's trying to get legislation passed to prevent this kind of thing from ever happening to another parent in Georgia. And at the moment, that's where things stand. It's unclear what will happen next. The government will either make good on its threat and jail this mother, or they'll move on and harass people who are actually breaking the law, hopefully. But whatever the government does, there are a few takeaways here that I think are worth keeping in mind. The first takeaway is that no matter where you live, you can't really escape the nanny state. So all the more reason why, and this is not a federal issue in this case, but still all the more reason why the federal bureaucracy, all the bureaucracy across the board needs to be, is public enemy number one. If the nanny state can come for a mother living in the mountains in Northwest Georgia, it can come for you too. We spent so much time over the last few months talking about national politics, but the truth is national politics aren't everything. Local politics aren't everything either. In the end, there's a very real possibility that your freedom and the freedom of your children could come down to the whims of one power-tripping district attorney or one sheriff who's having a bad day. If that sheriff thinks that she can raise your children better than you, then she can throw you in prison. This is the terrifying reality that parents everywhere face. And there are many horror stories just like this one. There are also horror stories of actual criminal abuse being inflicted on children by their evil parents. That does happen. And that is abuse that is often not noticed or not stopped by the people and agencies tasked with noticing and stopping it because they're too busy chasing down good and loving parents who parent in a way that was, again, totally commonplace up until very recently. This mother is certainly not the first to be arrested for something like this. When I was growing up, and anyone my age or older would say the same thing. We all say the same thing. My parents would tell us to leave the house, go play outside, come back at dinner time. We'd trek all over the neighborhood. We'd go into other neighborhoods. We'd go to the woods. We'd go anywhere we wanted. There were no cell phones. There was no nothing. Just my parents said, go have fun. We'll see you in 8 hours. Just go do whatever you want. And we did. We came back around dark, and this is how most of us grew up. But now, as parents, we face this scenario where if we give our children even a fraction of the independence that we had as children, we face the possibility of arrest and imprisonment. I mean, it's insane. As I said, there are a lot of stories just like this. Take, for example, the mother in Georgia who was jailed a couple of years ago for leaving her 14-year-old daughter to babysit her younger siblings for a few hours while she was at work. And, that she was arrested for that. Now, I can remember when I was a kid and my older sisters were left in charge of the house at that age or even younger. And we all survived. It was normal. Now it's the kind of thing that could get you handcuffed and thrown in a jail cell. Parenting in the modern age is difficult enough. And introducing more independence and responsibility into your children's lives is already stressful and worrisome, though it is necessary. It's part of parenting. You have to do this. But now as a parent, you face the very real possibility that if you introduce that independence and responsibility in a way that happens to offend the sensibilities of a nosy neighbor who then calls the police or CPS, you could find yourself standing in front of a judge and labeled a child abuser for life, because that label never wears off. Now, the good news is that in this case, the mother, Brittany Patterson, didn't back down. She didn't install some location tracker on a child's phone or cower in the face of the government's threats. She didn't sign the nanny state safety plan they presented her with. Instead, she went out and sought some exposure for her story. Reason magazine covered it. Now I'm covering it. The Daily Mail has also picked up the story. As a result, a lot of reasonable people are hearing about it. And any reasonable person who hears about the story will be outraged by it. This is at least one recourse that you have in this kind of situation. Although you don't have many recourses, that's at least one. You can expose the tyrants and what they're trying to do to your family. Maybe that makes them back down and slink away. These people are cowards, after all. At the very least, you will have shed more light on the kind of tyranny that many parents face in this country every day. And that is why the nanny state, and in particular the bureaucrats and police officers who are threatening to imprison a woman for allowing her 11-year-old son to go for a walk, are today canceled. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.